Welcome, everyone. My guest today is Lead Analyst Logan Mohtashami to give a preview of this week, which is both Fed Week and Jobs Week. Logan, welcome back to the podcast.
It is wonderful to be here. It is Friday morning. We're all enjoying the little event yesterday with Powell and Trump on the construction site. You know, a lot of good takes. I thought Josh Brown had a really funny one where Powell's reading the letter, and instead of reading the what they gave about the previous project, Josh Brown, who's a well-known stock trader, said, "Cut 50 basis points or El Salvador." Everyone had
kidnap, a ransom note.
Kidnap a letter. So it is what it is. This is what we're doing. It was entertaining just to see Powell's reaction and like, no, that's not right. That's not right. But what do we say? Theatrics, right? Yep. But before the event happened, you and I talked about it. I said he's gonna do some kind of a Zelensky event where he gets something in the camera. That's just how he operates out there. So, yep, this is the world. Like we said, popcorn from July, the second half of 2025. Get your popcorn out. There's going to be a lot of entertaining visuals out there.
Okay, well, let's talk about, we've had some interesting things happen regarding the dollar. So let's get into that before we talk about what happens next week.
Well, of course, for how we looked at the White House's game plan since November 7th, 2020, we said they really probably want three things to happen. They want a lower dollar, lower energy prices, and lower rates. And a lot of people say, well, if you get a lower dollar, that's inflationary because what you import will be costing more, and then you're on top of that you have tariffs. But in any case, Trump's always been a lower dollar guy. So what he said on TV, he said, "Hey, I'm always for a strong dollar, but you make a hell of a lot more money, when the dollar is lower." So and he's always been a lower dollar guy. It's just getting the dollar lower has been always challenging because the U.S. is so much bigger, so much more powerful economy than everyone else by a lot too. So there's just, that was in a sense why the euro was created, to kind of offset the dollar strength. But with that said, energy prices are lower, the dollar's lower. The White House is probably deeply frustrated that the 10-year yield is the only thing left. And traditionally, you would see if the dollar goes down, the 10-year yield goes down with it. And the 10-year yield has come down throughout the year versus where it was at the peak, but not to levels that I think, I mean, honestly, 3.80 to 4% on the 10-year yield with better spreads, they would be happy with that. They could run with that because, to me, Trump's so much of a visual person that if people see lower gas prices, lower mortgage rates, whatever goods inflation comes on a few items being, he believes he could offset that. And these are things that did not happen under the Biden administration, and they would highlight that. And that's just how he operates. So that's why the Trinity game plan was kind of the focus. But it's the third thing that hasn't occurred. And this is why they're just hammering at Powell at lowering rates and lowering rates.
How do you get the dollar lower? I mean, does that have a negative implication for what you're doing in the economy to get the dollar lower?
I mean, can you really get the dollar low enough to make yourself an exporting economy? I don't believe you can. And then there's what do we call it? The crazy people who always say, the dollar's on the verge of a collapse. The U.S. is broke.
Right.
And then I always go, so you're in the belief that Canada's currency and Mexico's currency are going to be so much stronger because we're broke, and Canada could then go buy New York and Mexico could buy California. And we always say this is a dying old man cult, right? One group of people, Sarah, just one, same group, always, doomers for life. And in this case, it's very difficult to get the dollar low enough to where, it as a consumption-based economy, you want a strong dollar and stuff like that because we consume goods and first. But if you want to be a manufacturing economy, it's just part of it is difficult in the sense because if you want Japan to buy more cars from America, well, Japanese don't buy big cars.
Right.
That's not what they do. We build big cars here. We love big cars. We love big houses. Japan, no. So there's limits to what you can export out to. But if you just want to increase the share manufacturing or the share of GDP or something like that, in the big scale of pictures, it can't be tremendous. But if you're trying to do something on the minor side, you could maybe pull it off. But I wrote that article on December of 2016, manufacturing under Trump, and how things were limited on what you can do. When you're a wealthier country, you become you just consume more goods and services, right? And that just grows as a population. So, China is trying to get itself kind of away from a exporting manufacturing because they want more consumption there. So it's a difficult task that I just don't fundamentally believe in. But in this case, when he made that statement about the dollar, not shocking whatsoever.
Not shocking. Okay, let's turn. We are recording this on Friday morning, but this is going to go live on Monday morning of both Fed Week and Jobs Week in a very key time.
Is it Shark Week too? Are we getting close there? I don't know. Man, if you get Fed Week, Shark Week, and Jobs Week together, oh my. Then we got to give it a Dinosaur Week in there somehow, and just there we go. So yeah, this is, big on multiple fronts. Friday morning, not much was happening with the 10-year yield. And again, if the labor market isn't breaking and consumption is still going, where Fed policy is, the 10-year yield between 435 and 470 is acceptable. If the Fed guides down and talks about we're going to get rate cuts in, everyone kind of adjusts to that. And just for a lot of people that said, the 10-year yield can go to 5 or 6% because Japanese long bonds are, at all-time highs, they're 30, 40 year. That did not happen, right? Everything is kind of in-house to a degree. Again, 65 to 75% of where things could range as Fed policy. So, of course, paper, rock, scissors, labor over inflation, right? So it works both ways. Inflation expectations were increased, not by a lot, but increased and talked about, if the growth rate of inflation goes back up to 3%, which isn't a lot from where we are now, this is why the Feds have been a little bit more mindful. There's consequences with taking that approach now, but Godzilla tariffs, obviously the market doesn't believe Godzilla tariffs would stay, but eventually you got to make some deals, and then we'll push it out to see what. Obviously, they're not cutting rates, but what does Powell say specifically? What's the goal to get that September cut? A lot of people are in the September cut. And again, none of this matters if the labor data starts to get weaker. And I think, I like we've constantly said this entire month, that if government jobs actually shedded 15,000 instead of created, 73,000, whatever that number was, we would all be having a different discussion, because then we would all acknowledge that private payrolls are slowing down noticeably. And this is where Christopher Waller differs from why wait until the labor market breaks. This kind of slowdown is evident because it's been here really for 18 months, actually close now to 18 to 24 months. But in this case, language is key, but you kind of want to see what's the metric for the September cut out there. Because remember, the Fed funds rate, where growth rate of inflation is, it's modestly restrictive. They want to get down to neutral. To me, the neutral policy, 3.5%, 3% eventually. It's a moving target that doesn't have too much value, because what happens in the economy will just strip that away in seconds. But I think that's the key of verbiage. And how does the bond market react? But if Jobs Friday is bad, hypothetical, let's just say 64,000 jobs were created, government jobs, nothing was created there, private payrolls, then I think the Christopher Waller's talking point becomes more apparent. It would have been more apparent this month, but government jobs, it's just the most hysterical jobs report ever, where government jobs really just threw everything to a loop. But that's the thing going on in the future. And always remember, the Fed looks at how consumers are consuming goods and services. Jobless claims are still low. So they're just going to remember the whole the whole premise of 2020. They will stay as restrictive as possible until the labor market breaks, and then they'll go, okay, we have catch up, right? I think Cleveland Fed President Beth Hammock, she really emphasized it in a clear way. We would like to play catch up. Catch up means you don't get forward. Christopher Waller, Fed Chairman Waller, says we don't believe in catch up. I've already seen enough. So you're going to start to see divergence within Fed presidents out here. And I think another story that came out this morning on Friday, that Powell kind of told everyone, hey, listen, I'm going to stay here until the very end. I don't care how bad it gets, and to his defense, he can't resign, because if he resigns, the king is dead. The pawns are going to be easier to knock off. So this is kind of why he has to hold the ground. Just on that principle alone, he can't leave his soldiers, for the oncoming armada. So he's going to take the stance, no matter how bad it gets. He is not going to resign.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's been his stance all along. I think it's a principled stance. So I don't think you can pressure him into resigning, because he's doing it for a reason, right?
No, I mean, New York bully ball, just going out there, trying to find something, make it media, make the highlights out there that this is bad or this is I can't believe they did the third building trick. That was actually funny. They just added a third building in there.
So that it would add to the total. He goes, I don't know about that. And so Trump shows in the paper, he goes,
oh my God.
You added a third building.
I sat there and I was like, he really did. He brought the third building trick in there. Oh, by the way, in any case, we've dealt with this for some time now, so everyone's kind of up to speed. But again, Fed labor data, job openings data was fine last time. The ADP report, these are things that we have to categorize. What's more important? Job openings to me is the number 3 most important data line out here, but the Federal Reserve loves it. The Federal Reserve loves job openings. If job openings were down to 6 million and the fires ratios were picking up, that's a different equation, because they love that data line. Not a lot of people do that. The ADP is the least important. Jobless claims have gotten better. The Fed, they sit there and they go, okay, if jobless claims break, Logan's right, we will break and start cutting, but we're not there yet. Continuing claims, which is the second category of jobless claims data, that's elevated at a 3-year high. It's not at recessionary levels that we would see in previous recessions, but it just shows that the labor market's softer. So for me, it's just trying to get to neutral policy faster, where Trump wants emergency rate cuts and you get the Fed funds rate below inflation. That's an extremely accommodative policy right now, but we'll see. And then Jobs Friday, just remember Jobs Friday, private payrolls, residential construction work, wage growth, right? What was the model we used for wage growth, Sarah Wheeler, for the last few years? 3% wage growth, because the Fed believes productivity is at 1%, and that's how you get 2% inflation. So wage growth has been slowing down. That is something material, because the Fed doesn't want, even though if they don't admit it to the public, they don't want private payrolls to slow down and wage growth slow down and the Fed funds rate be elevated. That's why they harped so much, attack the labor supply, attack. People are making too much money, attack it, bring wage growth down. People can't consume goods and services. So they believe if they can get wage growth down to 3%, they would have a party. I'm telling you, Jerome Powell will have a party in the Federal Reserve, in the other building that they try to tag him on, the third building, that have popcorn, that have chips and balloons. They got wage growth down to 3%, which to me I thought was the primary goal. Even though they say wage inflation doesn't create inflation, we don't. Yes, all you talk about is a labor supply attack. So that's something that keep an eye on Jobs Friday.
So I think the timing of this is so interesting, because like you said, what we're looking for is what is the language around it, because there are no July rate cuts, even though we talked about it, because of the last labor report, because this Jobs Friday, this comes out after the Fed meet. So it's not going to influence this Fed meeting anyway.
It isn't. The thing is that where the 10-year yield is right now, it's perfectly acceptable to Fed policy. As crazy as that sounds, that it doesn't look abnormal. And if you look at the last few years, I can make a case that the 10-year yield never got as high as it probably should have to some degree, right? I always bring people back to the 1990s. Like the 1990s, oh my God, the federal debt was lower, the deficit was lower, debt to GDP was lower, but the 10-year yield was like 6, 7, 8%. Mortgage rates were much higher. Like what? People forget the 1990s, but in this case, by the way, Hulk Hogan passed away.
I don't. We have had a whole raft of people this week. Theo from the Cosby Show. We had Hulk Hogan. We had
And
Chuck
Ozzy Osbourne.
Mangione.
But I mean, I do so much Hulk Hogan gifts as a kid of the '80s. Growing up, and Hulkamania, and so much of my attack on the American Bears and the Russians and the Chinese and Iranians, I always do throw Hulk Hogan at them all the time. So always remember, you know, everyone living in America, you are so privileged to live in this country this day and age. Y'all don't know how crazy it is out there and how bad it used to be, like, in the past. So, growing up in the 80s and Hulk Hogan, it's just like I'm just brought that into the adult stuff. That's why I use Hulk Hogan a lot in a lot of the music. And I always remember during COVID, when the COVID-19 recovery model was, we need the 10-year yield to go up higher because that shows that the economy is getting better, right? So it was an odd thing for me, but every time the 10-year yield go up, I would put Hulk Hogan gifts out there, American flags. So rest in peace, brother.
I have some things to say about Hulk Hogan that I will keep to myself, since he is somebody that you looked up to. It's been a weird week with that, I think. That's crazy.
Yeah, but for Jobs Week, Fed Week, keep it simple. Labor data runs everything. Fed statements are key, and always put job openings and the BLS Friday report. So, primary jobless claims comes out every Thursday. So that data line has gotten better recently. But wage growth, and keep an eye on that private payroll, because I think people forget manufacturing jobs were lost last year. Right. And manufacturing and residential construction jobs are typically late cycle things that go away. So we always want to keep an eye on that. Consumption is still holding up, but we're talking about getting to neutral, which I think is different than everyone else. Everyone else, and people are talking about emergency rate cuts or rate cuts down to very low levels. We try to keep it to consistency of what we talked about, is how do you get to neutral in an acceptable way without needing the labor market to break at that point. And then that's the discussion that at least I want to have. Trump has his own kind of agenda out there that's a little bit different.
But that Jobs Friday report, if it comes in weak, bond market can get ahead. We don't need to wait for the Fed.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, if government jobs lost 15,000 and we were, running a sub 60,000 payroll, total non-farm payroll report with private payrolls where it was, I think this entire month of July would have been different. That's why the irony was government. I mean, it was almost like the gods were playing a joke. It was so much of everyone's discussion points all altered when government payroll was the leading job gainer in their last jobs report. So, we'll see. It'll be a very interesting Jobs Friday.
We will see. And as always, everyone, look for the housing market tracker, all of those things that we look at every single week. I know that Logan will be working on it tonight. It's my last night in London, so I'm not going to be editing, but he's going to be writing that tracker and looking at it so that we can have that out on Saturday.
Yes, and again for the tracker, I think it was a very good week in explaining things like the purchase application data. I think people started to understand that we are seeing unbelievable double-digit percentage year-over-year growth. We haven't had that in a very long time, but if a lot of that are sellers waiting for buyers, it's a little bit different. And again, the tracker is designed not just for housing inventory, but it's demand and mortgage rate. It's the whole housing ecosystem put together in one fresh weekly report, so everybody could be ahead of the curve, because this is like months ahead of normal reports, so you don't get shocked about something happening. And I think this last week with the existing home sales report, I think a lot of people were shocked that inventory fell just a little bit. A lot of people were looking for an accelerated inventory growth and price growth to be negative on a year-over-year basis, not pick up just a little bit on tad. So again, let the tracker guide you, and you'll always be somebody that says, I knew it before you guys because I read. And Logan says the history of human civilization has always taught us that those that read have benefits over those who don't read.
Amazing. Logan, thank you for being on. Talk to you again soon.